You can't even imagine what it's like to be 75 years old, living in the house you built with your own hands, and hear your daughter-in-law sneer, "Your room stinks," right in front of the whole family. If you think you know how this story ends, you're in for a shock. Because when she tried to shame me in my own home, I stayed quiet. But something in me broke. And what I did next left her speechless. Before I tell you what happened after that Christmas dinner, I want you to do something for me. If you've ever been disrespected by someone you welcomed into your family, or if you've ever had to remind people that respect is earned, not given, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share your story in the comments. You're not alone, and your voice matters here. Let me take you back to that night. The house was full. My son, his wife, their 2 kids, and me. My wife passed away 5 years ago, and since then holidays have been bittersweet. I do my best to keep the family together, to make the house feel warm and alive. I cook, I clean, I even let my son and his family move in when times got tough. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was needed. But lately, things had changed. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, had become sharper, colder. She complained about everything. The way I folded the towels, the way I watched old movies, even the way I smelled. My son, Brian, just shrugged it off. "She's stressed, Dad. Just let it go." After dinner, I went to my room to get the dessert I'd made, my wife's famous apple pie. As I walked back into the dining room, I heard Jessica's voice, loud and clear. "Honestly, your room stinks. I don't know how anyone can live like that." She didn't even lower her voice. The kids giggled. Brian looked away. I stood there, pie in hand, feeling like I'd been slapped. I stayed quiet. I set the pie on the table, forced a little smile, and sat down. But something in me broke. I realized I was done being the family's punching bag. I was done letting Jessica treat me like I was invisible. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about all the years I'd worked, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the love I'd poured into this house. I thought about my wife, about how she'd always told me, "Don't let anyone make you feel small in your own home." I decided it was time to listen. The next morning, while everyone was out shopping, I packed my bags. I called my lawyer, Mr. Harris, and told him I wanted to sell the house. "Are you sure, Frank?" he asked. "It's your family home." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'm sure, and I want everything in my name. No inheritance for Jessica, not a penny." If you've ever had to take back control after being pushed aside, you know how terrifying and liberating it feels. I signed the papers, put the house on the market, and started looking for a place of my own. A place where I could breathe, a place that felt like home. When Jessica and Brian came back, the house was empty. My room was spotless. The only thing left was a note on the kitchen table. "You said my room stinks. Good news, I won't be living here anymore. And neither will you." Jessica screamed when she read it. Brian called me, begging me to come back, to fix things, to think of the kids. But I was done fixing things for people who never appreciated me. If you've ever had to walk away from the people you love to save yourself, you know how hard it is. But you also know that sometimes the best revenge is living your best life. What would you do if your own family tried to shame you in your own home? Would you stay and take it, or would you take back what's yours? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who turned the tables on his ungrateful family, watch it next. Sometimes the best answer is the one they never see coming. You ever walk away from everything you built and wonder if you're making the biggest mistake of your life? That's how I felt as I watched the moving truck pull away from the house I'd called home for nearly 50 years. My hands shook, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I was free from Jessica's constant criticism, free from Brian's indifference, free from the feeling that I was just a ghost in my own life. I checked into a small hotel on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asked questions and the coffee was always hot. I spent the first night staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the heater, wondering what my wife would say if she could see me now. I missed her more than ever, but I also felt her strength in my bones. "Don't let anyone make you feel small in your own home," she'd said. I finally understood what she meant. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Brian. His voice was frantic. "Dad, what did you do? Jessica's losing her mind. The house is gone. The money's gone. You can't just leave us like this." I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. "I didn't leave you, Brian. You left me a long time ago. I just finally caught up." He started to argue, but I hung up. I was done explaining myself to people who never listened. If you've ever had to set boundaries with your own family, you know how hard it is. But you also know how necessary it can be. I met with Mr. Harris at his office. He handed me a stack of papers, sale documents, bank transfers, a check with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. "You did the right thing, Frank," he said. "You deserve to live your life on your own terms." I smiled, feeling a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. "I want to buy a house by the lake," I told him. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere I can fish, read, and remember what it feels like to be happy." He nodded. "I'll make it happen." If you've ever dreamed of starting over, you know how scary it is to take the first step. But you also know how exhilarating it can be. I spent the next week house hunting, touring cottages and cabins, imagining a new life for myself. I found a place that felt just right. A small sunlit home on the edge of a sparkling lake, with a porch that faced the sunrise and a dock where I could sit and think. I made an offer that afternoon. By the end of the week, it was mine. Meanwhile, Jessica and Brian were left scrambling. I heard from neighbors that Jessica had tried to break into the house, screaming and cursing when she found it empty. Brian called again, this time begging for help. "The kids miss you, Dad. Jessica's lost it. Please, just come back." I didn't answer. I was done being the family's safety net. If you've ever had to choose between your own happiness and someone else's comfort, you know how hard it is. But you also know that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away. That night, I sat on my new porch, watching the sun set over the water, a cup of coffee in my hand and a sense of peace in my heart. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. What would you do if your own family tried to shame you out of your own life? Would you fight for your dignity, or would you let them win? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the man who found freedom after being pushed aside, watch it next. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. You ever sit on a porch, coffee in hand, and realize you're finally living for yourself? That's what I felt as I watched the sunrise over the lake, the water turning gold and pink, the world quiet except for the birds. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for someone else's approval. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit into someone else's life. I was just me. The first few days in my new home were peaceful. I unpacked my books, hung up old photos of my wife, and spent hours fishing off the dock. I made friends with the neighbors, retired folks like me who understood what it meant to start over. We swapped stories, shared meals, and laughed about the things we'd survived. But peace has a way of making people jealous. It wasn't long before Brian and Jessica found out where I was living. One afternoon, as I was tending to my small garden, I heard a car pull up. Jessica stormed out, her face red with anger. Brian followed, looking tired and defeated. She didn't waste time. "How could you do this to us?" she shouted. "You sold the house out from under us. You left us with nothing." I stood my ground, my voice calm. "You made it clear I wasn't welcome. I just gave you what you wanted." Brian tried to reason with me. "Dad, the kids miss you. Jessica's just stressed. We need your help." I shook my head. "You need to learn to stand on your own. I spent my whole life taking care of everyone else. Now it's my turn." Jessica's anger turned to desperation. "You're selfish. You're abandoning your family." I looked her in the eye. "No, Jessica, I'm saving myself. And maybe, just maybe, I'm teaching you a lesson about respect. If you've ever had to stand up to someone who thought they could walk all over you, you know how hard it is, but you also know how freeing it can be." They left in a huff, but I knew it wasn't over. That night, Brian called again, his voice sour, aching. "Dad, Jessica's not well. She's talking about calling the police, saying you stole from her." I sighed. "Let her try. I have every document, every receipt. The house was mine. The money was mine. I did nothing wrong." If you've ever had to defend your own choices, you know how exhausting it is. But you also know that sometimes the only way to protect your peace is to let people face the consequences of their own actions. The next morning, I got a call from my lawyer. "Frank, just a heads up. Jessica tried to file a complaint. The police called me. I sent them the paperwork. You're in the clear." I thanked him, feeling a wave of relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what someone else might do. I was in control of my own life. If you've ever found freedom after years of being taken for granted, you know how sweet it is. What would you do if you had the chance to start over? Would you take it, or would you let guilt hold you back? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the man who found his strength after being shamed by his family, watch it next. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply living your truth. That night, as I watched the stars from my porch, I realized I hadn't just bought a new house. I'd bought myself a new beginning. You ever realize that peace is something you have to fight for, even after you've walked away? That's what I learned as the weeks passed in my new home. The lake was calm, the neighbors friendly, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night. But every so often, the past would come knocking, sometimes in the form of a phone call, sometimes in the form of guilt. Brian called less often, but when he did, it was always the same. "Dad, Jessica's struggling. The kids miss you. Can't you just help us out, just this once?" I listened, but I didn't give in. I'd spent too many years bailing them out, only to be treated like a burden. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Jessica. The handwriting was shaky, the words sharp. You abandoned us. You left your grandchildren with nothing. I hope you're happy in your new life. I read it twice, then set it aside. I wasn't going to let her anger poison my peace. Instead, I focused on building something new. I joined a local fishing club, started volunteering at the library, and even took a painting class. I made friends, real friends, who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from scratch, you know how hard it is. But you also know how rewarding it can be. One evening, as I sat on the dock watching the sunset, my neighbor, Tom, joined me. He was a widower too, and we often swapped stories about our families. You did the right thing, Frank, he said. Sometimes you have to put yourself first, otherwise no one else ever will. I nodded, feeling a sense of validation I hadn't felt in years. It's not easy, I admitted, but I'm learning. If you've ever had to choose between your own happiness and someone else's comfort, you know how heavy that choice can be. But you also know that sometimes the only way to move forward is to let go of the pay. The seasons changed. The garden I planted bloomed, the house felt more like home, and I found myself smiling more often. I even started writing again. Stories, letters, memories of my wife. It was a way to keep her close, even as I moved on. If you've ever found hope after heartbreak, you know how precious it is. What would you do if you had a second chance at happiness? Would you take it, or would you let the past hold you back? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the man who found peace after being pushed aside, watch it next. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. That night, as I sat by the fire, I realized I hadn't just left a house behind. I'd left behind a life that no longer served me. And in its place, I'd found something better. Freedom. You ever realize that the more you let go of the past, the more room you make for something new? That's what I discovered as spring arrived at the lake. The days grew longer, the air warmer, and my heart lighter. I found myself waking up with a sense of purpose, eager to see what the day would bring. One morning, I got a call from an old friend, Bill, who I hadn't seen in years. Heard you finally got out of that madhouse, he joked. How's the new place? I laughed, feeling a joy I hadn't felt in a long time. It's perfect, Bill. You should come visit. Bill did visit, and so did others, friends from work, neighbors from the old street, even a few of my wife's friends who'd always admired her strength. We sat on the porch, shared stories, and toasted to new beginnings. For the first time in years, I felt surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide. But the past has a way of trying to pull you back. One afternoon, Brian showed up at my door looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. He stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, eyes downcast. Dad, can we talk? I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table the same way we had when he was a boy. He didn't waste time. Jessica's left me, he said quietly. She took the kids and moved in with her mother. I lost my job, I lost the house, I lost everything. I listened, my heart heavy but my resolve strong. I'm sorry, Brian, I really am, but you have to understand. I can't fix this for you. You have to fix it yourself. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I know, Dad. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. for letting Jessica treat you that way, for not standing up for you, for not being the son you deserved. If you've ever heard a real apology from someone who hurt you, you know how much it means. But you also know that forgiveness is a choice, not a duty. I put my hand on his. I forgive you, Brian. But you need to forgive yourself too, and you need to start over. For your kids. For yourself. He left that day with a promise to do better. I hoped he would. I wanted him to find the strength I'd finally found in myself. If you've ever had to let go of someone you love so they could find their own way, you know how hard it is. But you also know how necessary it can be. The days passed, and my life at the lake grew richer. I joined a writing group, started painting landscapes, and even adopted a dog from the local shelter. I named her Hope, a reminder that every ending is just a new beginning. If you've ever found peace after years of chaos, you know how precious it is. What would you do if you had the chance to start over? Would you take it, or would you let the past hold you back? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the man who found his strength after being shamed by his family, watch it next. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living your truth. That night, as Hope curled up at my feet and the sun set over the lake, I realized I hadn't just bought a dream home. I'd built a dream life. You ever look around and realize you're finally living the life you always deserved? That's what I felt as summer arrived at the lake. The garden was in full bloom, Hope chased butterflies in the yard, and my days were filled with laughter, creativity, and peace. I'd never imagined I could feel this free at 75. But even in paradise, the past sometimes comes calling. One afternoon, I got a letter from Jessica. It was short, but every word dripped with bitterness. You ruined our lives. You abandoned your family. I hope you're happy in your fancy house. I read the letter twice, then set it aside. I didn't feel anger, just a deep, quiet sadness for the woman who could never see past her own resentment. I realized then that some people never change, no matter how much you hope they will. Brian called occasionally, updating me on the kids. He was working 2 jobs, trying to rebuild. "It's hard, Dad," he admitted. "But I'm doing it. I want you to know I'm proud of you. I wish I'd stood up for you sooner." If you've ever heard those words from someone you love, you know how healing they can be. I told Brian I was proud of him too. We all make mistakes, son. What matters is what we do next. The seasons changed again. I hosted a small birthday party for myself, inviting my new friends, Brian, and the grandkids. We grilled by the lake, played games, and watched the sunset together. For the first time in years, I felt surrounded by love, not obligation, not guilt, just genuine affection. If you've ever found family in unexpected places, you know how precious it is. My neighbors became my support system, my writing group became my cheerleaders, and Hope became my constant companion. One evening, as I sat on the porch with Brian and the kids, my grandson asked, "Grandpa, are you happy now?" I smiled, looking out at the water, the sky painted in gold and pink. "Yes, I am. I'm happier than I've been in a long, long time." If you've ever doubted that happiness is possible after heartbreak, let this be your sign. What would you do if you had the chance to choose joy? Would you take it, or would you let the past hold you back? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the man who found peace after being pushed aside, watch it next. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. That night, as hope curled up beside me and the stars came out, I realized that my story wasn't about what I'd lost. It was about what I'd found. You ever realize that the best part of getting older is finally understanding what matters and what doesn't? That's what I discovered as another autumn rolled in at the lake. The leaves turned gold and red, the air crisp, and my days were filled with the kind of peace I'd only dreamed about in my old life. Brian and the grandkids visited often. We fished, played cards, and told stories by the fire. I watched my son become the father I'd always hoped he'd be, patient, present, and kind. The kids thrived, their laughter echoing across the water, their drawings and schoolwork filling my fridge. One afternoon, Brian and I sat on the dock, feet dangling over the edge. He looked at me, his eyes serious. "Dad, do you ever regret it? Walking away from everything?" I thought about it for a long moment. "No, son. I regret not doing it sooner. I regret all the years I let myself be treated like a burden. But I don't regret choosing myself, not for a second." He nodded, a small smile on his face. "I get it now, I really do. If you've ever had to teach your children about self-respect by example, you know how powerful it is. What would you do if you had the chance to show your family what real strength looks like? Would you take it, or would you keep shrinking to fit their expectations? To me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the man who found his strength after being shamed by his family, watch it next. Sometimes the best lesson is the one you live. Jessica never wrote again. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved on, found a new job, and was telling anyone who'd listen that I'd stolen her future. I let her have her story. I had mine. The holidays came, and for the first time in years, I looked forward to them. We decorated the house, baked pies, and invited friends and neighbors to join us. The house was full of warmth, laughter, and love, the kind that can't be faked or forced. If you've ever rebuilt your life after betrayal, you know how sweet it is to find joy again. What would you do if you had the chance to start over? Would you take it, or would you let the past hold you back? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the man who found peace after being pushed aside, watch it next. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living your truth. That night, as I watched the fire die down and the grandkids drift off to sleep, I realized that my story wasn't about Jessica or even about Brian. It was about me, about finally choosing to live for myself. You might think a story like this ends with a grand gesture or a dramatic confrontation, but the truth is, real healing happens in the quiet, everyday moments that follow. As another year passed at the lake, I found myself reflecting on everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. Brian and the grandkids became my world. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, and every small victory together. My wife's memory lived on in the stories we told, the recipes we cooked, and the love we shared. Hope, my loyal dog, was always by my side, reminding me that happiness can be found in the simplest things. One evening, as the sun set over the water, Brian joined me on the porch. "Dad, I want to thank you," he said quietly, "for showing me what it means to stand up for yourself, for teaching me that respect isn't something you beg for, it's something you demand." I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. We all deserve to be treated with dignity, son. Sometimes you have to walk away from the people who refuse to see your worth. If you've ever doubted your value because of someone else's words, you know how powerful it is to finally believe in yourself. What would you do if you had the chance to rewrite your story? Would you take it, or would you let the past define you? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the man who found his strength after being shamed by his family, watch it next. Sometimes the best answer is simply living your truth. Jessica faded into the background of our lives. I heard she remarried, started over, and told her own version of the story. I let her go, wishing her well, knowing that my happiness was no longer tied to her approval. The holidays came again, and this time our home was filled with laughter, warmth, and gratitude. We decorated the tree, baked cookies, and made new memories, ones that belonged to us and no one else. If you've made it this far, thank you for being part of my journey. Maybe you faced your own heartbreak, or maybe you're still searching for a way to heal. Whatever your story, know that you're not alone. There's always a way back, even from the deepest pain. So what would you do if someone tried to shame you in your own home? Would you stay silent, or would you stand up for yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the hope someone else needs. And if this story touched you, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Check out our other videos, especially the one about the man who found peace after being pushed aside. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we live through and the ones we choose to tell. Thank you for listening. Hold your loved ones close, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply living your truth.